The heat came down like a lid. For weeks, in the summer of 1889, Spokane Falls baked under a pale, empty sky. The timber that built the city, planks, cedar shingles oozing pitch, wooden sidewalks slick with old lamp oil, had turned to tinder, yet the place thrived. The railroad's whistle meant contracts, carloads, and crowds. Mills drummed beside the Spokane River, false front shops leaned along Front Avenue. Hotels made space for traveling salesmen, miners, and speculators with money to spend. Brick would come later. In 1889, the city's grand ambitions were still perched over wooden bones. On August 4th, that promise met fire. Just after 6 in the evening, a swirl of smoke rose near a small wooden structure on Railroad Avenue. A watchman rang the alarm, and volunteers hauled hose carts into the street. Spokane's fire companies were quick and proud, but the city had outrun its defenses. Hydrants sat where they had been placed years earlier, not where new blocks crowded together. When men cranked valves, pressure sputtered and died. Hoses split. Nozzles coughed thin threads that died mid-air. The fire, meanwhile, found exactly what it liked. Tarred roofs, resin-heavy timbers, open lofts stacked with hay and paint. People poured into the street. Some tried to help the firemen, forming bucket lines that broke as heat drove them back. Others heaved safes onto wagons or grabbed ledgers, photographs, a child's cradle, anything a family could lift in 2 hands. A grocer rolled barrels into the gutter and burst the heads. A dressmaker pushed her best machines into the alley and watched her windows give way. Sparks landed blocks away and licked at roofs. Wind carried sheets of embers across Front Avenue. By 7, downtown looked like a forge. Front Avenue glowed from end to end. The wooden sidewalks, saturated with oil and tallow, burned like fuses. Telegraph wires snapped and dropped into the street. The volunteer chiefs gambled on dynamite, blast a row of buildings and carve a fire break. Men lit fuses and ran. Thunder cracked the air. Cornices leaped and fell. The gaps turned to chimneys, pulling wind through the district and feeding the blaze. Blown boards went cartwheeling down the blocks, carrying fire faster than any hose could follow. Horses screamed and lunged until harness broke. Wagon wheels rutted soft tar, then the tar itself ignited beneath the teams. Families fled for the river or the bluffs. A woman held her skirts in one hand and a canary cage in the other. A hotel porter pushed a trolley stacked with kitchen pots and a single gilt mirror. Absurd and necessary. Children coughed at the brightness and the grit in their teeth. The air throbbed, the mixed roar of flame and concussion. A saloon's front went at once, a gust of heat dropping men to their knees. There were flashes of grit that felt like grace for a breath. 2 railroad men backed an engine in and used the tender to pump what water they could onto warehouses, saving a sliver of the line. A priest and a barkeep heaved at a cast-iron safe until it toppled into a cellar, sheltering paper wealth. A mill hand dashed into a smoke-choked hallway and came out coughing with a box of legal papers hugged to his chest. The stories multiplied. A child handed over a blanket-wrapped cat to a stranger, a teamster cutting traces with a pocket knife to free a horse that would not move, a telegraph operator tapping a final message before heat melted the insulation from his wires. By midnight, the fire had eaten the heart of the city. Over 30 blocks were gone. The opera house, the banks, restaurants, the newer hotels, warehouses once listed with pride in the papers, reduced to foundations and iron. Blackened chimneys stood like ribs. Cellars glowed and hissed as joists fell into them. Massive safes sat in ash fields, their paint blistered and numbers warped by heat. Miraculously, official tallies listed a single confirmed death, though people knew numbers lie when records burn. What no one disputed was the scale. Almost the entire commercial district vanished in a single night. Dawn showed the cost plainly. Smoke hung in veils over the river. Families camped on the banks under wagons and quilts. Men in scorched shirts perched on crates and stared at ash lines where their stores had stood. A clerk pried open a warped safe with a crowbar and handed out damp account books as if they might somehow grow a building. The smell, wet cinders, dynamite, scorched flour, settled in the throat. Children asked if the fire would return when the sun went down again. The first conversations after shock were not about leaving, but rules for rebuilding. Spokane would not reconstruct as it had been. The council moved quickly. No more wooden fronts downtown, no shingle roofs, iron shutters on the new blocks, brick and stone for bearing walls. Investors, instead of retreating, leaned in. Rail lines still converged here. Timber still stood in every direction. The city's position was unchanged. Only its skin had burned away. Architects arrived with plans for fireproof dignity. Masons and carpenters signed on for months of work that paid wages and pride. Relief arrived by rail from every direction: tents, blankets, lumber, stoves, food. Newspapers from Portland and Seattle called the fire a test. They were right. Within days, temporary sheds rose. Within weeks, permanent walls. Winter would not find downtown empty. By spring 1890, brick blocks marched along avenues where wooden ones had leaned. The city even shortened its name, printing Spokane on new letterheads to mark the difference between what had burned and what would stand. Stone banks, iron-fronted warehouses, and taller hotels announced a new ambition, not only to thrive, but to endure. Not everything could be stacked and mortared back. The human details persisted. A charred teacup saved from a boarding house table and turned into an heirloom. A notebook singed at the edges that a clerk copied out late into smoky nights. An apron left on the back of a chair in a kitchen that was gone. People retold the night the sky turned red and the streets burned. They taught children not only how to carry water and mind the wind, but how to imagine a safer street. Memory, unexpectedly, became infrastructure. The Great Spokane Fire took nearly all the city's visible wealth and left behind something less showy and more permanent, a sense that systems either work when tested or teach, by failing, how to be built right next time. Hydrants would be mapped to need, not convenience. Pressure would be measured and kept. Fire companies would be paid, trained, and equipped for the city people insisted they lived in, not the town they remembered. The rebuilding turned policy into brick. In the years that followed, visitors marveled at how quickly Spokane reappeared. Larger, sturdier, more deliberate. Brick gave the streets a new weight. Banks wore stone-like armor. Warehouses squared their shoulders in brick. Iron lintels spanned windows that reflected a river no longer rimmed with kindling. The lessons were costly, but they stuck. Whenever smoke later rose on the horizon, men reached for hydrant caps with a grim confidence. The city had been forged once. It would hold again. Every disaster story has a hinge. The moment loss hardens into lesson. Spokane's hinge was written in cinders, yes, but also in ordinances and payroll and hose couplings that did not burst. The fire ravaged a young city that believed more in its future than in its plumbing. The rebuilt city believed in both and paid for both. That is why, when people here recall August 4th, 1889, they describe not only terror, but also a morning cut from resolve. Thank you for listening to Road to Ruins. Subscribe for more true stories where systems fail and people pay the price.